Welcome everyone, my name is Robius and today I have a new episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History to share with you all. In this series, I compare events in a selected character's life within one of the Assassin's Creed games to the actual history the individual lived through. As always, beware of major story spoilers. For today's episode, we will be taking a look at the history of the Continental Army General, Charles Lee. As is customary, I'll begin this episode by sharing with you his pre-game history, which will inform us on his background prior to AC3, then his in-game history, which we see depicted in the game, and lastly we will analyze the differences between what happens in the game to the real historical events of the man's life. Starting with the pre-game history, Charles Lee was born on February 5th, 1732 in Durnhall, England, and was the son of Major General John Lee and his wife Isabel Bunbury. As a child, Charles was well educated thanks to his father's position, and he was eventually sent to Switzerland where he became fluent in Latin, French, Greek, and evidently English, among other languages. On April 9th, 1747, when he was 15 years old, Charles was given the position of ensign in the 55th Foot Regiment through the connections his father possessed. Other than this, little is known about Lee's youth. Once his education was finished, he served with his regiment in Ireland, and in 1751, following the death of his father, he was transferred to the 44th Regiment as a lieutenant, using his family's wealth to his advantage. In this position, he was sent to America in 1754 and participated in the French and Indian War under Major General Edward Braddock. It was at this point where we first met Charles Lee in AC3, where he met with Haytham and later the young Connor during the French and Indian War. Historically, while in America, Lee married the daughter of a Mohawk chief with whom he had twins. Charles was referred to by the Mohawks as boiling water in their native tongue. In 1756, Lee paid to be promoted to the rank of captain in the same regiment and therefore took part in an expedition towards the French fortress of Louisbourg, where he was wounded in 1758 and subsequently sent to Long Island to recover. It is said while there that a surgeon he had previously had a conflict with attempted to kill him. However, this was rebuffed, and by 1759, Lee was serving once again in the army until the end of the war. This last sequence seems rather accurately represented in AC3 when Connor was confronted by Lee during his youth, except for the fact that the Templars had originally killed Braddock in the game, which was not the case in real life. With the fighting in North America temporarily at an end, Charles Lee was transferred to the 103rd Foot Regiment as a major and later as a lieutenant colonel in the Portuguese army, fighting off the Spanish during their attempted invasion of Portugal. Following the Peace of Paris in 1763, Lee took a leave of service and was reinstated in the army in 1765, serving in Poland and in England. In 1769, Lee lost 2 fingers while dueling an opponent he defeated in the Russo-Turkish War. With the end of this conflict, he returned to America in 1773, buying an estate in Virginia since he found himself sympathetic to the American colonists' cause. With war quickly approaching, Lee resigned from the British Army and volunteered his services to the newly formed Continental Army. He wanted to be named Commander-in-Chief and expected such a position since he believed himself to be the most qualified. However, since he was born British and seemed somewhat slovenly, coarse, and eccentric, not to mention the fact that he expected to be paid, George Washington was chosen instead since he seemed to be calm and steady and did not require any compensation. Therefore, Lee was instead given the position of Major General of the Continental Army and had utter disdain for Washington, which was very well demonstrated in the game. He later served in the South and challenged the forces of the British expedition under Henry Clinton, who were sent to capture Charleston, South Carolina. Lee wanted to retreat at one point of the fighting, but the governor of the city forbade it, and eventually the Americans were successful. Despite his want for retreat, Lee was still considered the hero of Charleston. Following this victory, he joined Washington's forces in New York, and the commander-in-chief showed his appreciation for the then popular Lee by renaming Fort Constitution Fort Lee. Eventually, in 1776, when the Continental Army was retreating, Lee's hatred of Washington became evident when he sent letters to Congress condemning the man and claiming that he should be replaced as commander-in-chief. It is said Washington was accidentally given one of these letters, and instead of being angry, he simply added a letter of apology and sent both of them to the Congress. On December 12th, while traveling, Lee and some guards separated from his army and stayed at the White's Tavern in New Jersey overnight. The next morning, he was captured by a British patrol and was soon traded back to the Americans in exchange for General Richard Prescott. Back in command of his troops, during the Battle of Monmouth in June of 1778, Lee was ordered by Washington to attack the retreating British soldiers. However, instead he ordered his own men to retreat. Lafayette, who was also present, reported this back to Washington, since he was concerned about Lee's behavior. Soon after, Lee's troops ran into Washington's advancing army, and after Lee had a large display of insubordination, Washington had him arrested. On July 2nd of 1778, Charles Lee was court-martialed in New Jersey on the charges of disobedience of orders in not attacking the enemy, misbehavior before the enemy in making an unnecessary, disorderly, and shameful retreat, and disrespecting the commander-in-chief, under all of which he was found to be guilty. Although this is the historical record, certain historians believe that Lee may have been secretly aiding the British on purpose. However, this is not confirmed. As Lee's popularity diminished, he tried to have Congress reverse the court-martial's verdict, and when they refused, Lee openly attacked Washington's reputation. He was subsequently challenged to many duels in reasons of his behavior, including one with John Lawrence, who wounded Lee on his side. In early 1780, Lee was officially released from the Army service, and therefore he retired to his estate. On October 2nd, 1782, while visiting Philadelphia, it is said he was stricken by a fever and died while in a tavern. This whole last segment is very similarly shown in AC3, except for the fact that Lee was working with the British in a sense, since they were all part of the Templars in the game, and that it was Connor who ended his life following a long battle. In summary, the differences between Lee's actual life and his representation in AC3 were as follows. Firstly, the game didn't make any reference to his marriage to a Native American or the family he had with her, which might have given the story a slightly different feel. Secondly, Lee did not participate in the murder of Edward Braddock, as was shown when he helped Haytham Kenway. Thirdly, AC3 demonstrated that he purposefully allowed himself to be captured and that he aided the British, since the Templars were on both sides of the conflict, even though this may not have necessarily been the case. Fourthly, quite evidently, Lee was not a member of the Templar Order, nor did he become its master following the death of Haytham Kenway. Lastly, Lee did not receive his injuries from Connor, nor was he killed by the assassin. Instead, he was injured during some duels with certain rivals and eventually died of a sickness while in Philadelphia. And with that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters from any of the AC games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe for future episodes, and I'll see you all next time.